Susan's heart pounded as she stared at the empty patch of soil where her prized oak trees once stood. A sinking feeling consumed her as she realized her beloved backyard haven had been reduced to barren stumps. "No, this can't be happening," she muttered, hands trembling. Just yesterday, the lush canopy had provided cool shade and a cozy sanctuary for the birds that nested there. Now, an eerie silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint buzzing of bees searching for their vanished habitat. Fury rising, Susan whirled around to face the towering figures of the HOA board members who stood watching, expressions unreadable behind their mirrored sunglasses. "What have you done?" she cried, her voice cracking with emotion. "Those trees were mine. You had no right to cut them down." The HOA president, Margaret, stepped forward, her mouth set in a thin, unyielding line. "The trees were a liability, Mrs. Granger. They were encroaching on the property line and posing a danger to the neighborhood. We had to remove them for everyone's safety." Susan's jaw dropped in disbelief. "But I never received any notice. You didn't even give me a chance to appeal the decision." She fought back tears, her hands balling into fists at her sides. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "The decision was made at our last board meeting. We sent you the agenda as per our bylaws." She gestured dismissively. "You should have been more attentive." Fury simmered in Susan's chest, threatening to boil over. "Attentive? These were my trees, my property. You can't just—" She faltered, the words catching in her throat as she realized the futility of her protest. The HOA members exchanged loaded glances, the corners of their mouths twitching with something that resembled satisfaction. Susan's stomach churned with the realization that they had anticipated her outrage, and somehow she had fallen right into their trap. Clenching her jaw, she turned on her heel and stormed back into her house, slamming the door behind her. Sinking onto the couch, she buried her face in her hands, overwhelmed by a sense of betrayal and helplessness. How could this have happened? And what was she going to do now? Susan spent the next several days in a haze of rage and despair, her mind racing with ways to fight back against the HOA's blatant disregard for her property rights. She pored over the community bylaws, searching for any loopholes or procedural missteps that could give her leverage. But as she delved deeper, a growing sense of dread settled in the pit of her stomach. The bylaws were ironclad, granting the HOA broad authority to make decisions about the common areas and shared resources. And the board, it seemed, had carefully covered their tracks, following the letter of the law to the letter. Frustrated, Susan turned to her neighbor, Jen, who had been a sympathetic ear throughout the ordeal. "They're completely within their rights, aren't they?" she asked, her voice laced with resignation. Jen nodded grimly. "I'm afraid so. The HOA has a lot of power, and they're not afraid to use it." She reached out and squeezed Susan's hand. "I'm so sorry, Susan. I know how much those trees meant to you." Susan swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "I just don't understand how they can do this without even consulting me. Those trees were part of my home, part of my life. And now they're just gone." Jen's expression softened with empathy. "I know it doesn't feel fair, but the HOA has a lot of leeway when it comes to maintaining the community's aesthetic and safety. And they're not exactly known for being lenient or understanding." Susan let out a heavy sigh, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "So what am I supposed to do? Just accept it and move on?" Jen hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Well, I mean, you could try to fight it. But the legal battles against the HOA can be long and expensive, and the odds aren't usually in the homeowner's favor." Susan's eyes narrowed as a glimmer of determination flickered to life within her. "Then that's what I'll have to do. I'm not going to let them get away with this." With a newfound sense of purpose, she stood up, her gaze hardening. "I'm going to take this all the way to court if I have to. This isn't over yet." Determined to take on the HOA, Susan wasted no time in consulting a local real estate attorney. She recounted the details of the tree removal incident, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and resolve. The attorney, a seasoned professional named Michael, listened intently, his brow furrowing as he processed the information. "This is a clear case of overreach by the HOA," he finally said, his tone grave. "They failed to properly notify you and didn't give you the opportunity to appeal the decision. That's a serious violation of your rights as a homeowner." Susan felt a surge of hope, her heart racing. "So I can sue them. Make them pay for what they've done." Michael nodded slowly. "Absolutely. We have a strong case here. The HOA's actions were not only unethical, but also likely illegal. We can file a lawsuit and seek damages for the unlawful removal of your trees." "Damages?" Susan's eyes widened, her mind racing with the implications. "How much are we talking about?" "Well, the value of the trees themselves, plus any associated costs and emotional distress," Michael explained. "Given the size and age of those oak trees, I'd estimate the total damages could easily reach $50,000 or more." Susan's breath caught in her throat, her eyes widening in disbelief. $50,000? She shook her head, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the figure. "I had no idea it would be that much." Michael offered a sympathetic smile. "The courts take these kinds of property rights violations very seriously. The HOA will have a hard time justifying their actions, especially given the lack of proper notice and procedure." Susan felt a surge of determination coursing through her veins. "Then let's do it. Let's take them to court and make them pay for what they've done." Michael nodded, his expression resolute. "I'll get the paperwork started right away. We're going to make sure the HOA learns a valuable lesson about respecting the rights of homeowners like yourself." As Susan left the attorney's office, a sense of cautious optimism began to take root within her. Finally, she had a chance to fight back and hold the HOA accountable for their blatant disregard for her property. This was far from over. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal maneuvers and court filings as Susan and her attorney, Michael, worked tirelessly to build their case against the HOA. They combed through every detail, leaving no stone unturned in their pursuit of justice. The HOA, for its part, remained steadfast in its defense, deploying a team of seasoned lawyers to counter Susan's claims. They argued that the tree removal was a necessary measure to maintain the community's aesthetics and safety, and that they had followed the proper protocols outlined in the bylaws. But Susan and Michael were undeterred, methodically dismantling the HOA's arguments and highlighting the glaring procedural flaws in their decision-making process. They presented evidence that the board had failed to provide adequate notice and had denied Susan her right to appeal the decision. As the case wound its way through the legal system, the tension in the community escalated. Neighbors found themselves divided, with some siding with the HOA and others rallying behind Susan's fight for her property rights. The HOA board, sensing the growing public scrutiny, grew increasingly defensive and combative. They lashed out at Susan, accusing her of stirring up trouble and disrupting the community's harmony. But Susan refused to back down, her determination only strengthening with each passing day. She knew that the stakes were high, not just for her own financial and emotional well-being, but for the rights of all homeowners in the community. As the court date approached, the air crackled with anticipation. Both sides braced themselves for a decisive showdown, each confident in the strength of their arguments and the righteousness of their cause. For Susan, the outcome of this battle would not just determine the fate of her beloved trees, but the very foundation of her relationship with the HOA and the future of her family's home. The day of the trial arrived, and the courtroom was abuzz with activity. Susan, flanked by her attorney Michael, sat nervously in the front row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Across the aisle, the HOA board members and their legal team exuded an air of confidence, their expressions a mix of self-assurance and defiance. As the judge entered the room, the gallery fell silent. With a solemn nod, the proceedings began, and the battle lines were drawn. Michael wasted no time in presenting the case, meticulously outlining the HOA's failure to follow proper procedures and the significant emotional and financial impact the tree removal had on Susan. He called upon expert witnesses who testified to the value of the mature oak trees, both in terms of their monetary worth and their irreplaceable environmental and aesthetic contributions to the neighborhood. The HOA's lawyers, in turn, argued that the board had acted within its rights and that the decision to remove the trees was a necessary measure to protect the community's safety and property values. But as the cross-examination unfolded, cracks began to appear in the HOA's defense. Michael deftly exposed the inconsistencies in their claims, highlighting the board's lack of proper documentation and the absence of a genuine public safety concern. Susan watched, her heart pounding, as the scales of justice slowly tipped in her favor. She could feel the judge's gaze shifting, the uncertainty creeping into the HOA's posture. When the closing arguments concluded, the courtroom fell silent, the air thick with anticipation. The judge promised to review the evidence and deliver a ruling within the week. As Susan and Michael exited the courthouse, a glimmer of hope shone in their eyes. They had fought hard, and the outcome, though not yet certain, seemed to be leaning in their favor. "We've got a good chance, Susan," Michael said, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The judge saw through their excuses. "Now, we just have to wait and see." Susan nodded, a steely determination etched on her face. "I'm ready for whatever comes next." The week-long wait felt like an eternity for Susan, as she alternated between cautious optimism and debilitating anxiety. The fate of her beloved trees and her future in the community hung in the balance, and the uncertainty was almost too much to bear. Finally, the day of the ruling arrived, and Susan found herself back in the courtroom, her palms sweating and her heart pounding in her chest. As the judge took his seat, the room fell silent, the tension palpable. Susan gripped the edge of her seat, her knuckles turning white as the judge began to read his decision. "This court has carefully reviewed the evidence and arguments presented by both parties," the judge began, his voice measured and authoritative. "It is the ruling of this court that the Homeowners Association acted in violation of the established protocols and procedures." Susan's breath caught in her throat as she heard those words, a spark of hope igniting within her. The HOA failed to provide proper notice to the homeowner, Mrs. Granger, and denied her the right to appeal the decision to remove the trees. The judge continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. This was a clear violation of her property rights, and the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. A wave of relief and elation washed over Susan, and she had to resist the urge to leap from her seat and cheer. Beside her, Michael beamed with pride, his eyes shining with a sense of triumph. The judge's voice continued, "As a result, the Homeowners Association is ordered to pay the plaintiff, Mrs. Granger, the sum of $50,000 in damages for the unlawful removal of her trees." The HOA board members sat in stunned silence, their expressions a mix of disbelief and outrage. Susan couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication as she watched their faces fall, their carefully constructed facade of authority crumbling before their eyes. As the judge concluded the proceedings and the courtroom erupted into a buzz of chatter, Susan turned to Michael, her eyes brimming with tears of joy. "We did it," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "We really did it." Michael nodded, a warm smile spreading across his face. "Yes, you did, and you should be proud. This is a victory not just for you, but for all homeowners who deserve to have their rights respected." Susan's heart swelled with a newfound sense of empowerment and determination. This was just the beginning, she knew. The battle with the HOA was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the news of the court's ruling spread through the community, the reaction was a mix of surprise, outrage, and begrudging admiration. The HOA board members, still reeling from their stinking defeat, quickly convened an emergency meeting to discuss their next steps. "This is an outrage." Margaret, the HOA president, fumed, slamming her fist on the table. "That woman has made a mockery of our authority and cost us $50,000 in the process. We can't let her get away with this." The other board members murmured in agreement, their brows furrowed with concern. They knew that the court's decision not only undermined their power, but also set a dangerous precedent that could embolden other homeowners to challenge the HOA's decisions. "We need to appeal this ruling," one of the board members suggested, his voice tense with urgency. "We can't let Susan Granger walk away from this unscathed. This has to be a lesson to all the other homeowners in this community." Margaret nodded, her eyes narrowing with determination. "Absolutely. We'll appeal the decision and fight this all the way to the top if we have to. The HOA can't be seen as weak or vulnerable. Our credibility is on the line." The board members launched into a heated discussion, debating the best legal strategy and the potential fallout from the ruling. They were acutely aware that their reputation and the balance of power within the community were at stake. Meanwhile, Susan and Michael celebrated their hard-won victory, but they knew that the battle was far from over. They'd braced themselves for the inevitable appeal, understanding that the HOA would stop at nothing to protect its authority and defend its actions. "They're not going to let this go," Susan said, her voice laced with a mixture of apprehension and resolve. "But we're ready for them. We're not going to back down." Michael placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I know you're not, and we'll be here every step of the way, fighting alongside you. This is just the beginning, Susan. We're going to keep pushing until we get the justice you deserve." As the sun set over the community, the stage was set for a prolonged and bitter conflict, with both sides determined to emerge victorious, no matter the cost. The HOA's appeal of the court's ruling was swift and relentless, as they mobilized their legal team and poured resources into overturning the decision. Susan and Michael found themselves locked in a high-stakes legal battle, their every move scrutinized and challenged by the HOA's formidable legal arsenal. The courtroom proceedings were heated and contentious, with both sides vigorously defending their positions. The HOA argued that the initial ruling was flawed, insisting that they had followed proper protocols and that the tree removal was a necessary measure to protect the community. But Susan and Michael were unwavering, presenting a meticulous case that meticulously dismantled the HOA's arguments. They highlighted the board's blatant disregard for due process and the significant emotional and financial toll the tree removal had taken on their client. As the legal battle raged on, the community became increasingly divided, with some residents rallying behind the HOA and others offering their unwavering support to Susan. The tension was palpable, and the animosity between the two sides threatened to tear the neighborhood apart. In the end, after weeks of intense litigation, the appellate court upheld the initial ruling, affirming that the HOA had indeed violated Susan's property rights and that the $50,000 in damages was a justified and appropriate remedy. The HOA board members were left stunned and humiliated, their carefully constructed facade of authority crumbling before their eyes. Susan, on the other hand, felt a sense of vindication and empowerment, her determination and perseverance having paid off in the face of overwhelming odds. As the dust settled, Susan found herself at a crossroads. She could choose to remain in the community, forever marked as the homeowner who had dared to challenge the HOA's power, or she could take her winnings and start anew elsewhere. In the end, Susan decided to stay, her heart set on using her hard-won victory to inspire and empower other homeowners to stand up for their rights. She knew that the battle with the HOA was far from over, but she was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, her resolve strengthened by the knowledge that she had the power to make a difference. The story of Susan's fight against the HOA's overreach had become a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the mightiest of institutions could be held accountable when homeowners banded together and fought for what was rightfully theirs. And for Susan, that was a legacy worth fighting for.